Hello, BookTube. It's yet another bookshelf tour. This is bookshelf number 5 of the thin east wall bookcase. And once again, we'll do the transverse books first to get those out of the way, because they're on top of the others. The first one of those is a bit of a surprise, some of you probably will think, on Chessel Beach by Ian McEwan. This is a novella of his that is very strange, even for this strange author. It tells the story of young newlywed couple on their wedding night who go to Chesil Beach. They go to the first night of their honeymoon, and they get to the boudoir and they become intimate. And the young man in question in the novel, does one of the only things men do right. And it absolutely horrifies the young woman who goes out running into the night. It's a very strange literary performance, and I keep going back to it. It's not by any means Ian McEwan's best book. It's, in fact, bizarre and a little bit pathological, but I keep going back to it. I don't know why. And I kept it because on my intergalactically famous book blog, Steve Reads, I was wandering around, I was doing this and that, I was being extra bloggy, even for me, and then I decided to run a review, a rumination on Chesil Beach, and it rededicated, it refined in my mind the idea of what my blog was going to be. I can't really even now put it precisely into words, but it clarified my thinking on what I wanted to do, and really was the beginning of my blog, in my opinion. And that has given the book a sentimental place on my shelf that it probably doesn't deserve, but that's all right. And then the next book is something that those of you in real life have seen me talk about many times, and you probably got copies of it from me. It's Owl by William Service. It's his thin little book about taking in an owl and keeping it in his house and for a while until it dies. And it is sparse and beautiful and utterly memorable, and so whenever I see a copy, I think I have 2 right now. Whenever I see a copy, I grab it because it's in the little sub genre of books about people who take in owls. It is by far the best, the one that is a masterpiece. And then the last of the transverse books is also a favorite of mine that I'm sure I've given copies of to many people. It's Thomas Mallon's A Book of One's Own, and it's a study of personal journals. And I read it and reread it all the time. He breaks them down into categories. The categories of journal keepers are the chroniclers, the travelers, the pilgrims, the creators, the apologists, the confessors, the prisoners. And he just breaks down a vast amount of journal writing along those, admittedly artificial categories. And it's delightful. Best book I've ever read on keeping a personal journal. And then we're done with the transverse books, and now we will do the books proper, starting with an indulgence of mine that I've mentioned many times before, National Geographic books. This one is on wild animals of North America. These old National Geographic books that have great black and white photos, high-def black and white photos, but also great color illustrations all throughout. And they're heavy on anecdote and just wonderful. I just think they're wonderful. They're a voice from another time in terms of natural history and natural appreciation, but that other time is what gave birth to the American Museum of Natural History in the first place. So, and then it looks like the next 2 are also works of natural history, and they're in this room because I think they're great. This one is Illumination in the Flatwoods by Joe Hutto, in which he gets to know a group of turkeys, follows them around, becomes accepted by them, watches them closely, and discovers a society, culture, hierarchy of learning, hierarchy of respect, humor, exploration, a great deal of intelligence. In the course of the book, you come to the unsettling realization. He doesn't really stress it this much. He's mostly concerned with his birds. But you come to the unsettling realization in the course of the book that if you were to study almost any group of animals with this kind of sympathetic detail, you would find whole worlds of complexity and nuance that you don't want to cook and eat, that you no longer want to cook and eat, that you no longer want to cause to suffer in whole populations every season. but that's not his purpose. This isn't a preachy book at all. That's just a little preachy aside of mine. This is just a great work of closely observed natural history. If you have any interest in birds, or especially if you have a population of wild turkeys near you, find this book and read it. You'll be forever changed. Same thing's true with this, a classic, Elephant Memories by Cynthia Moss. This is her study of one extended family of elephants in Africa. She broke a lot of ground with the study of elephants in the wild. She was could her and one or two other people whose books I don't have could easily be considered the Jane Goodalls of African elephants, studying their culture, the matrilinear lines of instruction and caretaking and whatnot. Just an amazing book, just amazing. And then we go to a pachyderm of another kind. I can say that now because she can't sue. This is Lillian Hellman's Scoundrel Time. It's a thin memoir of hers that, despite the fact that it's only 100 pages long when it's soaking wet with rocks in its pockets, still took her forever to do, and had to be dragged out of her with hammer and pitons, mainly because she is a perfect example of my oft-repeated contention on this channel and in person that, Christopher Hitchens notwithstanding, alcohol is fatal to any kind of sustained creative work. If you do it, then you won't do sustained creative work. You will just talk about it. When it comes down to it, the moment when you have a blank sheet of paper and a typewriter, in her case, 1 drink will get you going. 2 drinks will stop you. 3 drinks will paralyze you for 2 days. That's 2 days of work that you won't get done. It's poisonous to writing. And it's the reason why even a tiny thing like this couldn't get done on time. Over and over again. Deadlines missed. Over and over again. Money apologized for. But even so, the book itself is great. It's her voice on every page. Talk about someone's voice on every page. This is The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. I now realize a hardcover that has seen better days. I have read this so many times. He was great, and he was great to talk to, and he's the author, of course, of half a dozen books that are worth your time to read, but I honestly do believe that this one is the most purified. This is the essential drift of Sagan's humanism, and I can't recommend it strongly enough, especially now, when 45% of the American public believes that vaccination cause autism, that alien abductions happen every day, that angels are real, and when 45% of the American public, when polled and asked in patient-specific detail, do not know that the Earth revolves around the sun, and 15% of the 45% that don't know that, when told that, say they're not completely sure. They'd have to see the data. Sagan had no idea. The subtitle of this book is Science as a Candle in the Dark, and when he died, he had no idea how dark the dark would get and how fast it would happen. In his more depressed moments, in conversation, he would allude sometimes to a coming dark age. He thought he saw the signs, having been a student of the history of science, but he had no idea. No idea at all. The book glows with happy optimism, despite that. So if you're on the fence about reading Carl Sagan, of course you shouldn't be, but read that one, definitely. Then I'm going to show these next two together because they really are a pair, even though 2 very distinct, massive amounts of creative work went into their creation. It's still a unit in my mind. And I remember me mentioning that some Norton critical editions were more worth having than others, and that a few of them were the edition of the book in question to have if you were only going to have one. Well, this is an example of the latter. This is the Norton Critical English Bible, the King James Bible. This is the Old Testament and the New Testament with introductions, gigantic amounts of footnotes. I wonder if I can show you. Yeah, there you go. Text and then footnotes, half the page. And then massive amounts of supporting essays and critical analysis and textual analysis of just a staggering amount. This is, of all the Bible editions, King James scholarly editions that I have ever had and I've ever read, this beats the others by a wide margin. This is an astonishing work of scholarship on Norton's part. Not just something, a lot of the work they do are, I'm not saying they're bad, but they're meant for schools. They're meant for students. Here you go. Here's the book. Here are a few selective essays in the back. There you go. This struck me from the very first page to the very end as aiming for something much more than that, and it achieves it wholeheartedly. This is a Bible to own. It's not cheap, but if you want to read a critical Bible, and you have no other, and you're not going to get any other, that's the one to get. And then we have a classic in its own right. This is the Kings and Queens, British Kings and Queens, by Mike Ashley. This is a Barnes & Noble edition of a book that he did. It's huge. And if a lot of times at Barnes & Nobles later, and sometimes in used bookstores now, you will see a book roughly by this title, by this author, but it's much smaller. And you should avoid that if you want the comprehensive thing. This is the comprehensive thing, a book that he obsessed about, wrote it for years, despaired of ever finding a publisher, and found a couple, because it only takes you a second reading it to realize what it is. He takes you through the entire history of king and queenship in the British Isles, not just the throne in London, but every field hedge prince in Wales, every King David in Scotland, all the kings and queens in Ireland. I think I'm one of them. Every single person who has ever achieved commandship of more than 20 people, ever put on airs to make themselves a king or queen, gets described and dealt with in this book. Now, the back half, half the book that's about the kings and queens of the roughly United Kingdom, is brilliant. Don't get me wrong. He breaks everything down by statistics. He breaks it down by geography, and he also has a wonderful through narrative. But that beginning part with those kings and queens who are remembered now only in, a stray paragraph in Bede, to have somebody obsessively go through the primary sources that we know of and give us those people all in a list in one work of reference is just astonishing. No student of the British Isles should be without this book, even though I think it's probably tough to come by. I have never seen a second copy after the one I have. And then, to finish up the shelf, I'm afraid, we have another 2-volume work of Christian scholarship. Didn't really intend that to be a theme on this shelf, but nevertheless, this is Raymond Brown's 2-volume The Birth of the Messiah. Or no, this is The Death of the Messiah. The Birth of the Messiah, believe it or not, is elsewhere in this room. I never missed any. Basically, I've never missed anything this guy wrote. This is his gigantic study of the text and the significance of the crucifixion, the death and crucifixion narratives, the passion narratives of Jesus Christ. And he was a believing Christian, but he was also a root and branch scholar. So the two live perfectly well side by side in these two great volumes, as of course they can. It's one of the things that always irritated me about the so-called new Christians was when they would get on a podium in front of a bunch of biddable students and tell them that Christians can't do scholarship. And not only was I offended on behalf of my beloved Erasmus, I also had Raymond Brown in mind, who would have got, if he'd been alive, it would have gone on the podium and said, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you invalidating my entire life's work? Do you see anything in this scholarship that isn't valid? It was just a silly, junkyard dog type claim. Best ignored and best to read instead authors like this. Even if you don't agree with the fact that's evident throughout the books. The fact that's evident throughout the book is that he considers the Gospels to be the revealed Word of God. And you might think that would be, lethal to their probity as works of scholarship, but it's not. It's not. All critics have their predispositions. Revealed Word of God or not, they all have their predispositions, even I. But anyway, so that is the 5th bookshelf of the thin East Wall bookcase. And we will grind on with the 6th bookshelf as soon as I've recovered my strength and you've recovered yours. Thank you, BookTube.